Am I a jerk for not refunding my friend $600 after she backed out of our group trip? My friends and I decided to go on a 12-day ski trip during winter break. We found a place to stay, and the total rental cost was about $600 per person. We decided it would be easiest if one person, me, paid everything up front, and everyone would reimburse me before the trip, which they all did. In our friend group, we have a girl. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah comes from a wealthy family and was actually one of the people who suggested the trip, and one of the main ones pushing to find an Airbnb. Literally, in the weeks leading up to the trip, everything was fine. We were all excited, sending each other outfit ideas, restaurant reservations, etc. Then, on Tuesday before our departure, Saturday, Sarah started messaging the group, saying things like, "Girls, Jacob's family, her boyfriend, is going to be next week," basically giving us lots of details about where her boyfriend's family was going for their winter vacation. Details we really didn't need to know. Then, on Thursday, again we were leaving on Saturday, she sent a message to the group saying she couldn't go because of a family emergency. She claimed her grandmother had been hospitalized. Obviously, we were upset, but family comes first, so I told her I would refund the money she had sent for the rental. We went on the trip, and everything was fine until one of my friends, who has Sarah's location on Line 360, their roommates, noticed that she was in a coastal city. We put 2 and 2 together. That night, we were all furious, and we confronted her the next day, where she admitted everything. She had been invited last minute to her boyfriend's vacation and decided she wanted to go instead, but she didn't know how to tell us. Of course, we all felt hurt and upset that she chose a guy over us. But at the end of the day, she's a 19-year-old girl, so I guess it's just immaturity. The part where I wonder if I'm the bad person is that after discovering that she voluntarily dropped out of the trip, I told her I wouldn't be refunding the $600 she had sent me for the rental. She backed out so last minute that we couldn't find anything cheaper, and I had said it was okay to waste that money because, again, I thought she was dealing with a family emergency. After realizing she wouldn't get her money back, she freaked out and started calling me a bad friend and all that. My parents think I should return it, but I don't see why I should. She backed out because of her boyfriend and expected all of us to absorb the costs. Days passed, and the situation with Sarah became a recurring topic in our group. Some of my friends felt that I should refund her, while others understood my position and agreed that Sarah had acted selfishly. However, none of us expected Sarah to take matters into her own hands in the worst way possible. One night, while we were in the cabin, I received a message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw that it was Sarah using another phone. She sent me a long text calling me a thief, saying I had ruined her trust, and that she would do whatever it took to get her money back. I tried to ignore it, but in the following days, we noticed strange things on our social media. Someone had started spreading rumors about us on a local forum, and several people were messaging us, asking if it was true that we had scammed Sarah. The situation escalated when one night, after returning from skiing, we found our cabin completely ransacked. There were no signs of a break-in, but it was clear that someone had been inside. Nothing of value was missing, but some of our belongings were out of place, as if someone had been searching for something specific. We called the resort management, but they found no evidence of forced entry. The next morning, one of my friends received an anonymous message with a picture of us in the cabin. It was taken from outside through the window. That sent chills down our spines. We had no idea who could be doing this, but we all had the same suspicion: Sarah. At that moment, the tension in the group was palpable. Some of my friends started questioning whether confronting Sarah so directly had been a mistake. Others, like me, felt that what was happening only proved that she was not the victim in this situation. But how far would she be willing to go to get revenge on us? However, what happened next made us realize that this was only the beginning. The feeling of being watched never left us. Despite trying to distract ourselves with skiing and exploring the nearby town, we always found ourselves returning to the same conversations about Sarah and what was happening. Something didn't add up. The breaking point came one night when one of my friends, Emily, woke up screaming. We all jumped out of bed and ran to her room. She was trembling, eyes wide open. She told us that someone had been standing outside her window watching her. We turned on all the lights and searched the cabin. We didn't find anyone, but in the snow outside Emily's window, we could clearly see footprints. The worst part was that there were no entry or exit marks, as if the person who had been there had simply vanished. That was when we realized this had gone too far. We couldn't keep ignoring the situation. We decided to report it to the resort management and call the local police. When the officers arrived, they inspected the area and took our statements, but without solid evidence, there wasn't much they could do. They advised us to reinforce the locks and stay alert for any suspicious activity. Things seemed to calm down for a couple of days, but the unease never really went away. Then one morning, while we were making breakfast, my phone vibrated with an Instagram notification. It was a direct message from an anonymous account. It contained only one thing: a picture, an image of the 6 of us in the cabin, sitting in the living room, laughing. The image was recent. It had been taken the night before. We all froze. Fear settled into our bodies. How was it possible that someone had taken a picture of us from so close without us noticing? What did this person want? We called the police again, but since there had been no acts of violence or evidence of forced entry, they simply told us we were probably being targeted by a prankster. A prankster. As if being stalked was funny. We decided that one of us should go back to the city and try to find out if Sarah was behind all of this. We had no proof, but it was the only logical explanation. Natalie, one of my friends, volunteered to go first. She would leave early in the morning and keep us updated. However, the next day, just as we were saying goodbye to her at the door, she received a text message. It was from Sarah. "Don't go. Don't do something you'll regret." We were in shock. Sarah knew. She knew what we were planning. Was she watching us? We tried calling her, but her number was out of service. However, in the panic of the moment, we overlooked something important. Sarah never spoke to us directly. She only sent the message to Natalie. That meant she not only knew what we were planning, but also exactly when we were planning to do it. With a growing sense of paranoia, Natalie decided not to leave alone. We agreed to accompany her to the city to try and gather more information about Sarah and what was happening. But just as we were getting into the car to leave, something made us stop. A black car with no visible license plates was parked near the cabin. It didn't belong to anyone at the resort. No one got out. No one got in. It was just there with tinted windows and the engine off. At that moment, we realized that this wasn't just about Sarah anymore. Something much bigger was happening, and we were trapped in the middle of it. The black car was still there. None of us dared to move. The freezing mountain air seemed even colder as we stared at the vehicle in the distance. We had no idea who was inside or what they wanted from us, but we knew it wasn't a coincidence. "We can't stay here," Emily whispered, breaking the silence. I nodded. We needed to act fast. Natalie could no longer travel alone to the city, and staying in the cabin didn't seem safe either. The only thing we could do was stick to our plan, but together. We got into the car, and just as I turned the key in the ignition, the black car turned on its headlights. We all froze. It didn't move immediately, but the fact that it had turned on its lights at that exact moment made us feel even more threatened. "What if it follows us?" Zoe asked, her voice trembling. "Then let's find out," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I shifted gears and pulled out of the cabin's parking lot. The black car waited a few seconds and then started moving behind us. My heart raced. I took the mountain road at a controlled speed, trying not to seem too desperate, but the car was still there. It wasn't speeding up too much, it wasn't trying to catch us, but it also wasn't stopping its pursuit. "This isn't normal," Michelle said, looking through the rearview mirror. "Do you think it's Sarah?" Zoe asked. "Sarah doesn't have the money or the patience to pull something like this," I replied. "This is something else." 15 tense minutes passed. I decided to take a detour down a less traveled road to see if the car would follow us. It did. "They're definitely following us," Emily said. I took a deep breath and made a decision. If they wanted to follow us, it'd make them work for it. I stepped on the gas, taking a curve at a speed that wasn't exactly safe for a mountain road. Zoe screamed and Michelle gripped her seat tightly, but I didn't stop. The black car tried to keep up, but it wasn't as fast. I saw it growing smaller in the rearview mirror as we took a sharp turn and disappeared from its sight. "We lost them," Natalie shouted, feeling momentary relief. "For now," I muttered. We took the road back to the city. We couldn't return to the cabin. We needed answers. If Sarah had anything to do with this, someone in her circle had to know. her family, her boyfriend, someone. We reached the city and parked on a busy street, trying to calm ourselves. That's when my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have done that." I showed the message to the girls. No one said a word. Fear hung thick in the air. "We're going to Sarah's house," I finally said. "Are you crazy?" Emily exclaimed. "We don't have a choice. This has to end." I drove to Sarah's address, a 2-story house in a gated community. It was late, but the lights were on. We got out of the car and approached the door. I hesitated before ringing the doorbell, but before I could, the door opened. It was her mother. She looked at us with a frown. "What are you doing here?" she asked, a mix of surprise and annoyance in her voice. "We need to talk to Sarah," I said, trying to sound firm. Her mother sighed. "Sarah isn't here. She left 3 days ago." We exchanged glances. "Where did she go?" Natalie asked. "I don't know. She just said she needed time. She didn't give me any more details." My heart sank. If Sarah wasn't here, then everything that had been happening couldn't have been just her doing. Something bigger was going on. "Did Sarah say anything about us?" I asked. Her mother shook her head. "She didn't mention anything, but she did ask about money before she left. She said she needed it urgently." That confirmed something. Sarah was involved, but we didn't know to what extent. We thanked her mother and walked away from the house. If Sarah needed money, maybe she was in trouble, Michelle said. "You think someone's forcing her to do this?" Emily asked. "I don't know, but I think it's time to find out." We got back into the car, and just then, my phone vibrated again. Another message. "This isn't over. Go back to the cabin, or you'll regret it." We fell silent. Going back to the cabin wasn't an option. But was it possible that Sarah was actually trying to warn us? Paranoia mixed with urgency. We no longer knew who to trust. But what we did know was that someone was watching us. And now they had our lives in their hands. We had no choice. We had to go back. The decision was made. We would return to the cabin, but this time we would be prepared for whatever was waiting for us. No one spoke as we drove back into the mountains. The road, now covered in a thicker layer of snow, seemed even more desolate than before. The black car was no longer where we had last seen it, but that didn't mean we were safe. When we arrived at the cabin, something immediately felt off. The door was slightly open. "I'm sure we locked it," Emily whispered, her breath forming a cloud in the freezing air. We cautiously approached. I slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside, our hearts pounding. The cabin was completely silent. There were no signs of forced entry, but something inside felt off. "Don't touch anything," I murmured. We split up to check every corner of the cabin. The living room was exactly as we had left it, but when Zoe and Michelle went upstairs to the bedrooms, they screamed in unison. We ran up the stairs, breathless, and froze at what they had found. On the wall of one of the rooms, someone had written in what looked like charcoal, "You shouldn't have come back." My stomach twisted. Someone had been here. Someone knew we were coming back. "We have to leave, right now," Zoe said, her voice shaking. But before we could move, the sound of an engine outside stopped us. We peeked through the window and saw headlights approaching. It wasn't the black car from before. This was a dark pickup truck with no license plates. "They found us," Michelle whispered. Panic set in. We didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but we knew we couldn't stay to find out. "Through the back door," I ordered. We moved quickly, but before we could escape, someone knocked on the front door hard. 3 knocks. Firm. Intimidating. We froze. "Who is it?" Natalie called out, her voice breaking. "Silence!" Then another knock. Louder this time. We stood there, unsure of what to do. The truck was still outside, its lights shining. We could see shadows moving inside the vehicle. There was more than one person. "We have to go now," I whispered. We moved swiftly to the back door and carefully opened it. The snow crunched under our feet as we stepped out into the freezing night. We ran toward the forest surrounding the cabin, hoping to hide among the trees. As we ran, we heard the front door slam open. Someone had entered the cabin. We crouched behind a group of trees, holding our breath. From our position, we could see figures moving inside the cabin. They were searching for something, or someone. One of them stepped onto the porch and looked around. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. We couldn't hear what he was saying, but the urgency in his voice was clear. "We have to get to the car," Emily whispered. We nodded and moved carefully. But when we reached a clearing in the forest, we realized something terrifying. Our car was gone. We stood in shock. We had left it right there, and now there was no sign of it. "They've trapped us," Zoe said, her voice filled with despair. Just then, my phone vibrated with a message. My hands trembled as I pulled it out and read it. "There is no escape. Come inside and talk. We don't want to hurt you." I showed the message to the girls. No one knew what to do. "They're telling us to go back?" Natalie asked. "That's not an option," I said. But before we could make a decision, another sound reached us. Branches snapping, footsteps approaching. It wasn't just the men in the cabin. Someone else was in the forest with us. We turned around, trying to see who or what was getting closer. The darkness concealed everything. But then, between the trees, we saw a figure, tall, motionless, watching us. Then it started moving toward us. We froze in place. The figure in the trees moved slowly, each step accompanied by the crunch of snow beneath its feet. We couldn't see its face, but its presence alone was enough to send shivers down our spines. Behind us, inside the cabin, the shadows were still shifting. We were caught between two unknown threats. "Do we run?" Zoe whispered. "If we do and they see us, they'll catch us," I answered. The figure stopped. The silence was unbearable. Then, in a low, raspy voice, it spoke. "Don't move. Don't make a sound. You're in danger." We looked at each other, unsure whether to trust him or not. "Who are you?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. The man raised his hands in a gesture of peace and stepped forward just enough for us to see his face. He had a rough beard and tired eyes, like someone who hadn't slept in days. He wore heavy outdoor gear and carried a backpack over one shoulder. "My name is Daniel. I don't have much time to explain. Those men in the cabin, they're not just here for you. They've been watching this place for weeks. They're looking for something, or someone." "Sarah?" Michelle asked. The man nodded. "She messed with the wrong people, and now you're caught in the middle of it." The sound of doors slamming inside the cabin made us flinch. The men were coming out. We crouched lower behind the trees, holding our breath. "If you want to get out of this alive, follow my instructions exactly," Daniel whispered. We had no other choice. He led us down a barely visible trail through the forest, moving quickly but silently. Behind us, we could hear voices. The men were searching for us. They were calling our names, trying to lure us out of hiding. "They're hunting us," Natalie murmured. "Don't talk," Daniel ordered. After what felt like an eternity, we reached an old cabin hidden among the trees. Daniel pulled a key from his pocket and quickly unlocked the door. "Get inside, now." We rushed in, and he shut the door behind us. Inside, there was a small space stocked with supplies, blankets, and a shortwave radio. It was clear he had been using it as a refuge for some time. "You're going to need this," he said, handing me a flashlight and a knife. "For what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because this isn't over." A noise in the forest made us jump. Footsteps. Someone was close. Daniel's radio emitted a faint buzz before a voice crackled through. "We know you're in there. Come out now, and there won't be any consequences." We looked at each other, fear evident on our faces. "What do they want?" Zoe asked. Daniel exhaled heavily. "Sarah stole something that didn't belong to her, something they need to get back. And now, you're all part of the problem." The sounds outside grew louder, knocking on the door. "There's no more time," Daniel whispered. "They're coming in any second. If you want to live, do exactly as I say." The door shook under the force of a heavy blow. It was breaking open. Daniel pulled a gun from his backpack and looked at us seriously. "Run, don't stop. Follow the flashlight to the end of the trail. There, you'll find a road that leads to the highway." "What about you?" I asked, unable to hide my concern. Daniel gave a tired smile. "I'll do what I have to do." The door burst open. A group of men stormed in, flashlights and weapons in hand. Daniel fired the first shot before we could even register what was happening. "Run!" he shouted, and we did. We bolted into the snow, running as fast as we could. Gunshots echoed behind us. The flashlight Daniel had given us was the only thing guiding us through the forest. We didn't look back. We didn't stop. We just ran. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the edge of the road. A truck was passing by at that exact moment. and without hesitation, we ran toward it, waving desperately for help. The driver hit the brakes and let us climb in without asking questions. "What happened?" he asked, alarmed by our faces. "Just get us out of here," I whispered. We drove away from the forest, the cabin, everything we had just been through. No one spoke during the ride. We only looked back, watching as the darkness of the mountains swallowed everything we left behind. Sarah never reappeared, neither did Daniel, and we never found out what was really at stake. But at that moment, the only thing that mattered was that we had survived, and that, for us, was enough.